1960. That was not the context of any of them, whether they were landing in Mexico near the pyramids, near Buenos Aires, all over the world. They were photographed, the same type of crafts, in different years, different time, different conditions. So, they cannot talk about fixing photos. That the interactions were always of a positive, or progressive, of purposeful nature. And so if we excite the mind that someone is coming to get us, they could have gotten us a long time ago. And if really we're worried about aggression and destitute, we really produce enough of that on this planet on our own. I don't think any outside influence would really change the outcome much.
Glenn, any support from other investigators who agree with you, with your father's theories about these bases?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's some other books that were published. There was a book published called Moongate, and I can't remember the author off the top of my head. It's in the archives. And there's another one called Somebody Else is on the Moon. I think that was Bryan's was one of the authors. But they did similar research. Researchers and scientists, we went in '89 to a conference in Europe in which the Soviet, the wall had come down, and there were some former Soviet scientists there that my father talked to quite extensively, and I actually just got a UFO report from the society in Ukraine. They were talking about why the former Soviet military response is much more benign than our own concerning these craft. I would say that there's a great deal of support into this, and I received an enormous amount of contacts when my father passed away from countries and organizations that I didn't even know we were all corresponding with.
We've got plate number 57. Go to that for a second.
Plate 57, you got a page?
Yeah, that is on... It is on 111. It would be.
Okay.
A number that continually
There we are, lunar orbiter shot, which is also one of the shots that's on your website.
That's the one with a perfectly round circle.
That's correct.
Now, what is that structure immediately underneath it? Is that a triangle object over it? Is that a pyramid-shaped object? What do you think that is?
First thing to do when you're doing observations from altitude or looking down on pictures like in this method is to determine from which direction the sun's coming from. And you can see that if you turn this plate so the number 19 is facing you, that at the top of the page or the north of that picture is where the sun's coming from, because it illuminates the bottom half of the crater. It also illuminates, if you would put your pencil right next to it, it would illuminate the face of that cylindrical object. And the fact that it's slightly off the ground throws a shadow from the angle of which the sun comes from. It's the same thing as if you look at the next lunar orbiter shot that shows the cloud over the lip of the crater. You can see the lip of the crater, then it's obscured, it throws a shadow underneath, and then the crater continues.
Why does it give a shadow like a pyramid, as opposed to...
Well, that
would it be straight?
It could be that it's not exactly symmetrical. It could be that it's elevated at an angle, not necessarily totally horizontal. One end could be tipped up or tipped down.
Which we can't see, I guess.
Which we cannot see. And those lunar orbiter shots were, of course, very rudimentary in the beginning.
Well, and also, Glenn, as you know, George Adamski believed that Venus was where there were beings. Did he not?
Yeah, when we were talking about the discontinuity of information, concerning the moon, there is also a dichotomy of information concerning the other planets as well. Of course, we talked at one time that Mars was uninhabitable and that Mars was inhospitable, and Venus as well. And at the same token, now, over a period of time, we find out that we have polar ice caps. They're talking about underground water, if not more than that. Sometimes scientists are talking about vegetation. I have a report from Dr. Jastro here, who in 1980, he is the, he was working for NASA and Institute of Space Studies, and he says that he believes the space agency has a skeleton in his closet, that the data from Viking spacecraft that landed on Mars receives positive evidence of primitive kind of life on Mars. So that was in 1980, more than 20 years ago. So a little bit leaks out, and it's forgotten. Then we talk about water, we talk about the possibility of vegetation. Every time we look at this equation, it tends to get better and better.
Mm-hmm.
And my same question is about Venus as well. The Russians sent their probes, we sent our probes. we measured 800, they measured 400. Now they're saying it's closer to maybe 125. They tell the people that they show them radar images of sharp mountains with jagged peaks. At the same time, they tell them that the atmosphere is 100 times denser than ours, 400 and some degrees, and the wind is blowing 400 miles an hour. I mean, that would sandblast that thing into a golf ball in no time. You know, and then they tell the people that we're going to take a spacecraft, a probe, and put a parachute on it and drop it through 100 times denser atmosphere with thermal updrafts of 400 degrees and 400-mile-an-hour winds. One has to wonder, how is all of this possible? So, but getting back to Mr. Jones's
theories.
Well, his theories or his feelings or what have you, they're talking about the possibility of life on Mars, which I believe then is also quite possible. We have the great debate upon the face on Mars, the pyramids in Cydonia, and whether or not they vacated their planet to go somewhere else and to live underground. Well, that is certainly the freedom of one's opinion. Underground isn't necessarily a very nice place to live. We're not groundhogs. Studies have shown that we do need exposure to ultraviolet light, the sun, and to the elements, and in order to evolve and survive in a halfway reasonable fashion. And when we talk about the moon, they reported, the Surveyor 5 already reported that the moon's surface contains materials much like Earth's. Silicon and oxygen are one of the most abundant minerals. It talks about that the lunar soil that was brought back by Apollo, that the seedlings that were planted in lunar materials actually grew better than in our own soil, considering the pesticides and what else we do. That's not real surprise. So there is a great deal of commonality between the construction and composition of planets, because we do come from the same primordial ooze when the solar system forms approximately 5 billion years ago.
Well, this entire universe is that way.
Well, of course. We're coming from the same womb of creation where all the materials are combined and put together and spun and cooled and heated and everything else. So we share it all. And more importantly, the NASA scientists talk about that how each planet trails behind it like a comet, but it's not luminescent, a huge matter trail of biomaterials. And that as we go in orbit, this mixes with the other planets who are trailing it behind there, and we're all bombarded by millions of pounds of meteoric dust, microorganisms, molecules, amino acids, all the compositions of life from space every day. What happens to us happens to everybody else, and we pretty much, you throw it all in the same soup, you're going to get a pretty good tasting soup.
Glenn, I don't know why, though, I keep thinking that maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, we had civilizations on this planet that had the kind of technology, and they went to the moon. Maybe they set up bases, and of course, they've abandoned them because something with some kind of horrible catastrophe occurred here. But I keep thinking that, and I don't know why. Well, I mean, there's a number of authors who have talked about other civilizations, advanced civilizations, and of course they clash with our common archaeologists, because we continue to want to tell the people that right now in the area of the world where we are having a very large conflict, the cradle of civilization, at one point everybody stopped running around throwing pebbles and spears at animals and decided to sit down by the riverside and now farm, So we have some very interesting leaps of faith in that whole equation. And so, there was, Colonel James Churchward wrote books about the commonality of symbols between South Pacific, the Mayans, the Egyptians, around the whole planet, and that is still quite an open discussion. East of the Rockies, welcome to Coast. You're on with us. Hi there.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Go ahead.
How you doing, Glenn? Great show.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if Glenn believed the moon itself was like a spacecraft or a base, like as in Jim Mars' Alien Agenda book?
Sure, good question. Some have thought that the moon is metallic, for example, hollowed out on the inside.
Titanium shell.
What do you think, Glenn?
Well, I don't know on the titanium shell portion of it. you're talking about a pretty large satellite body here. If the construction of that would naturally be an enormous feat. I've heard more theorizing about the moons of Mars